Good morning and welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, the legislature has returned for, I think it's going to be a huge and busy 1 month trying to get the budget for the next fiscal year done on time, plus a myriad of other issues. State Senator Rob Teplitz is here to help me look at what possibly is ahead with the budget, and then we have a couple of the folks who lead some of Pennsylvania's important school organizations to weigh in on the important education issue. All of that and more following these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, welcome back to the program. Senator Rob Teplitz is sitting across from me. He represents the 15th Senate District that's in South Central Pennsylvania for our viewers all over the state. Senator Teplitz, welcome.
Thank you.
And by the way, he doesn't get a break because he's a Franklin and Marshall College alum. I've told him that on many occasions. Well, seriously, I'm glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Oh, wow. I mean, wow is one word I can use. I mean, I think you would agree. All right. Before we get into the details, what are the big issues? I mean, just generically, we'll get into them specifically, that you think you all are going to take up.
I think the big issue is how do you balance this budget when we're facing a $1.2 billion hole and do it in a way that meets the constitutional deadline without hurting Pennsylvania families the way that they've been hurt in prior budgets.
Right. All right, so let's talk about the budget. And I'm going to get into detail with the folks from the education community in a minute. Go through what you think are 3 or the 4 most important specifics that need to be done in the budget.
I'm going to be looking for an investment in public education. I'm going to be looking for job creation and job retention strategies, health care. I'm also going to be looking to see, how do we balance this and get to a number in a way differently than has happened under the 3 prior Corbett administration budgets, where the administration has been very good about cutting, but not so good about investing over the long term, and that's what we need to be doing.
One of the other issues that I don't know if you'll take up directly, you all, and it has to do with Medicaid expansion that would cover, and I've seen different numbers, let's just say 500,000 to 600,000 people. You would agree with that?
Yeah.
And the governor has a plan, Healthy Pennsylvania, it's before Health and Human Services. You sent, meaning your chamber, bipartisan, sent over to the House a Medicaid expansion bill. You think that's likely to come up?
I think it may get new consideration. I mean, in order to fill a $1.2 billion hole, there are only so many big ticket items that you can use to fill that hole. Medicaid expansion is one of them. A severance tax on Marcellus Shale is another one. Between those two, if we had bipartisan support, we probably get most of the way there.
Yeah, now, certainly you've already done the Medicaid expansion. Now, you had some caveats in it, but it looked to me that they could be worked out, that they could be, dealt with bureaucratically, administratively in one way or another. But let's talk about Marcellus Shale. Your party's candidates, your party's nominee, Tom Wolf, wants a severance tax. I've heard discussion out of Republican leaders about the prospects of doing that. Governor Corbett is still not on board. So do you think your caucus, not your caucus, but the chamber itself would vote for a Marcellus Shale severance tax if the governor's not going to sign it?
That's a good question. I hear Republican leaders of the House and Senate openly talking about a severance tax in a way that would have been unthinkable a year ago. And, as I said, there are only so many ways that are available to us to balance the budget. The governor may not have a choice. And, the industry may be willing to soften some of its opposition, although some in the industry have been supportive, realizing that they may get a better deal now. I've always said we should have, some reasonable rate, not the highest or the lowest in the country, and this may be an opportunity to get to that point.
Is that in the 4.5% to 5% range, something that most other states have? Is that, we're talking about a tax on the amount of the quantity of cubic feet of gas that comes out of these wells. You would pay it on the cubic feet extracted. which is different from another tax called the impact fee, which is a tax on each well, just to make sure, so the folks follow our discussion.
Yeah, I mean, 4 to 5% would be the maximum that I would like to see. I think if we have some, mid-range rate, it allows us to address the concerns in our budget. It allows us to bring in revenue so that we can have appropriate environmental oversight to grow the industry. Because many of us are supportive of the industry. We just want to see it grow in a responsible way.
Sure. Now, one of the things that's not on the table, no, you got an 800. When we come back, we're going to run to a break. I want to talk a little bit about, pension reform and liquor privatization, two issues that could be pushed. But there's been no discussion of any other taxes or fees. I mean, sales tax hike seems to be off the table. Income tax. Do you agree?
I agree, and I think they should be off the table. I don't want to see any broad-based tax increases. I think Pennsylvania families have been hurt enough, and Pennsylvania businesses have also. I wouldn't want to see those.
All right, when we come back, I want to talk with Senator Teplitz about pension and also about liquor privatization, two issues that conceivably could come up for a vote this month. We'll do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back. I'm talking with Senator Rob Teplitz. We're discussing various aspects of the budget. He's a Democrat. He represents a district in South Central Pennsylvania. For our statewide viewers, most of the folks in South Central Pennsylvania know who he is, obviously. All right, Senator, liquor privatization. Now, it was originally in the form sent over to the Senate, a full privatization, wholesale, retail, all going into the private sector. Now, in your caucus, there's discussion of a hybrid. What's the possibility that, liquor privatization? It's a big push?
I think privatization, as it's commonly understood, is unlikely to happen. We've been promoting what we call modernization, which addresses the concerns that exist about customer convenience, about pricing, selection, store hours, those kinds of issues, but without hurting the state's bottom line by not losing the revenue that the system brings in.
So let me make sure I understand it. You would keep the liquor store operation state-owned, but license out. Finish my sentence. You'd be licensing out beer and wine?
No. What we would be doing is keeping the system as it is, but addressing concerns about where the stores are, when they're open, the types of purchases you could make there. We do some things on the beer side, making it easier to buy less than a case or more than a six-pack in those appropriate places. But the system itself would largely stay intact. And the reason for that is because it brings in so much money each year. We wouldn't create the system from scratch, but we can't afford to lose that money now.
Yeah, I mean, is that the plan that the Republicans, I thought, had another version of that where they would keep the state-owned stores, but they would actually license out to, the private sector possibilities of, expanding both wine and beer sales. You think that's the push?
That's the Republican plan, but that's not our caucus plan.
Okay, I got it. But there's these two competing plans.
There are.
Prospects for a vote, would you, good,
I don't know. I think that we could get a majority to vote for modernization. I mean, it makes sense. The problem is that the other side knows that if that ever went into effect, it takes the air out of privatization.
Okay. One other quick question about pensions. $49 billion heading to $60, all the reports. Two big state-owned pension systems eating up the budget of the state. Conceivably, $2 billion out of the $29 billion budget will go just to pension payment. Big concern about that out of the schools. We're going to talk with some school, folks who represent people in the school districts of our state. Big concerns about that. What's going to happen with it?
Well, last year we spent most of the month of June talking about pensions and liquor and didn't get anywhere. And then the budget itself was kind of an afterthought. I think this year we need to focus on the budget itself. We've put out a plan on pensions. The first step in that plan has already been implemented, which is Act 120 of 2010, which addresses the issue of the state not making its contribution. But the second step that we have proposed is refinancing the debt, saving the state money by investing $9 billion directly into the liquidity of the pension funds. That alone would go a long way towards saving money.
But the big debate would be whether you go for new employees to a 401k, 403b, if I got all that terminology right. And there's a big division. More Republicans, correct me if I'm wrong, essentially more for that. Notice the word I use, more for that. Democrats more for the program that you just talked about. Is that accurate?
That's right. I mean, changing the structure of the plan is more of an ideological issue than a mathematical one, because it's not the structure of the plan that has caused the financial challenges. It's the state not paying its share. And so many of us believe, let's deal with the problem that was created, not fight these ideological battles.
And does that come up? Do you think that they push that for a vote?
I don't think so. I really don't think
both
so.
Both those are off the table, and liquor product. All right, we got about less than a minute left. You're in the head of the Reform Caucus. If Rob Teplitz today had his way, give me one reform in your caucus that you say, let's do, and let's do it now.
Well, we've been working for a year on strengthening the laws regarding gifts to elected officials. We've got a bill in the House and the Senate that are making their way through, and I feel very optimistic they will get through.
Not a lot of cash that you can give somebody for you.
No one's handed me an envelope of cash yet, and I don't want one.
I understand.
But we're trying to deal with those issues in a forceful way.
Are you for a complete gift ban?
I would vote for a gift ban, but not everyone would. But we're strengthening it to require much more disclosure, which in itself is a disincentive.
All right. Hey, thanks for coming in. All right, when we come up, we're going to talk with a couple of folks who represent various aspects of Pennsylvania schools. We're going to get into the education. It's the single most important issue in the gubernatorial election. That's not what our point is. Our point will be to get their assessments of the condition of Pennsylvania's public schools. We'll do that in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit pacoalalliance.com.
Welcome back to the program. Well, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the education situation in this state. We've heard an awful lot about deficits in education, what's going on in the school districts. Jim Buckheit, he's the executive director of the Pennsylvania Association of School Administrators, is here, and Joe Bart, he's the executive director of the Pennsylvania Association of Rural and Small Schools. These are the folks who represent people who deliver education services. All right, Joe Bart, I'm going to start with you. Here's what we've heard: cutbacks, curtailments of programs. I mean, newspapers, TV shows, radio programs. That's been the narrative. Give me your assessment of the condition, the fiscal condition of not every school district in this state, but the typical school district. What do they face?
Well, the districts that our organization represents, the small rural school districts, and you could put poor in there as well, because they have so much less economy of scale than bigger districts, have really felt the brunt of this in terms of furloughing staff, cutting programs. And what they cut are those things that they can legally cut that people just don't understand. We don't have kindergarten because the law doesn't require we have kindergarten. So that continues, and I think that it's going to get worse before it gets better.
And we've seen for the last 3 years major fiscal pressures, a combination of limited new state revenue, sort of stable federal revenue, marginal increases in local revenue, combined with increased costs for pension contributions, increased labor costs related to health care and pay for school employees. Those pressures have combined to force school districts across the state to cut through this year nearly 30,000 employees across the state. About more than half of those are teachers. And right now, school districts across the state are preparing the budgets for next year. Right. And we're already hearing Philadelphia is looking at laying off another 1,000 employees this year. Allentown, 70. Even the relatively wealthy communities.
So this is both, as Joe Barr just talked about, both rural schools and even urban schools.
And suburban.
And even some of the wealthier
Yes.
suburban school districts.
Yes.
Let's talk, one of the things we keep hearing, in the polls that folks have done, the single most, I'll put it this way, hated tax, I think you would agree, is the property tax, right? Mm-hmm. And is the fact that we're shifting more and more of the burden to the local property tax owner, less than the states, the differential share has been dramatic over the last 40 years. Go ahead.
And we can only shift so much to local taxpayers because Act 1 puts a cap on how much of an increase you can have in property taxes. And I understand the dislike, the hate for the property tax, but there is no solution that has been offered other than a substantial increase in personal income tax that would make up the difference.
And/or sales tax.
If you cut out property tax, you're going to come $2+ billion short of funding schools.
So if we talk about it, let's look at it another way. The property tax is unpopular, but it's stable, and school districts can at least know they're getting it and can control it. One of the concerns that I hear is, first of all, raising income and sales taxes, not very popular, but there's a bill in the legislature that's gotten a lot of buzz, and whether it passes or not remains to be seen. But would it be of some concern that if the state is providing all of the revenues, you'd be at the legislature's mercy for the distribution of that money, which has not always been, and I'll be candid about it, equitable. Am I unfair in that?
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. So right now, the state provides a little bit over 30% of the total cost of operating our public school system.
Right.
That's one of the lowest levels in the entire nation. We were once at the highest level, 1974, I think, was 54% of the total.
I want to stop you there. I want to continue this, but we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about that, and also the cost of pensions to the schools. These are big issues. They're likely to come in some form before the legislature during the months of June. If not, the problem then I think that these gentlemen are talking about will continue to grow. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
Welcome back. All right, when we were talking about the fact that we got property tax versus the other, the state share and what that all means, but you also have a situation with pensions that are also a cost driver in the schools.
Sure. We were just talking about the property tax issue, and that if the state wanted to fund public schools totally, it would be out of the control of school districts, out of the control of local communities to support their public schools. And in this state, the way the system's currently operated, we have school districts spending $22,000 a student, and other school districts spending $11,000 a student. And that's just that.
And there's no
changed.
formula to distribute
That's right.
the money based on, poverty or kinds of individual situations that would make a difference,
Yeah,
right?
This change to eliminate property taxes would perpetuate that lack of equity in resources.
All right. One of the other issues that comes up is charter schools. There's been a big proliferation. We don't have to get into whether we like them or not like them and good or bad. We've done shows on that before. It's not the point that I want to ask you, Joe. But it's the relationship that they have with schools and whether, in fact, the public schools have to support the charters and whether they get fiscally, I won't say hurt, but, taking their revenues away and they're not replaced by the state.
Yeah, they definitely are hurt. And again, I agree. We don't argue the legitimacy of charter schools. It's how they're paid for and how the state is allowing them to be paid for right now. And we talk about the need for money in basic education. We would need a lot less new money if we fixed some of the holes that are there. We are bleeding money to charter schools. We are bleeding it in excess of what we should be paying for special education.
And in pension payments too, right?
And pension, and in the pension double dip, and particularly with just the tuition special ed costs. The charter schools are using those funds as part of their general operating budgets rather than for special ed services, because there's nothing in the law to stop them from doing that. And it's costing public schools millions.
All right, before I let you go, the legislature's coming back. There's going to be a big pressure, I think, to increase the education budget given the importance that we know of it this year. How optimistic are you that something will get done, even though the state has this big, fiscal hole, $800 million to $1.2 billion, whatever?
Well, I think they will do something. Maybe it won't be quite up to what the governor has put on the table, the $368 million increase he has proposed. Right. But I think they will contribute something because they know of the precarious situation that school districts face.
I agree.
You agree?
Yes.
Any likelihood that any adjustments will be made to the things that you've been talking about? We have about 40 seconds.
Oh, the big issues on the table right now are special education funding reform and charter school reform. And right now, both of those things are sort of lurking behind the scenes, and there's a lot of challenges.
Okay, Jim gets the last word. All right, we'll be back next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.